Hello, Earthlings and humanoids. Adam and Akbar in our last lecture on the climate policy module in our course on philosophy and climate change. Geoengineering, what's up with that? So we've talked about it a little bit, and I find that students are really fascinated with this topic. And so I thought what we could do is a very quick introduction to geoengineering. And hopefully I do enough to kind of get you the tools you need to study this on your own if you're interested. Okay, here's what I want to do. This is very introductory and exploratory, and this will probably be shorter than most of my other lectures. You're probably getting sick of listening to me anyway. We'll go through some definitions. We'll talk about what kinds there are. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's happening now, very briefly and roughly. Answer the question, do we need geoengineering to achieve our climate goals? And the answer is, well, it depends on who you ask. And then a little bit on ethics of geoengineering. And I have some things in your notes, not required reading as usual, but things if you want to follow up for more information, there it is. Okay, one of the important places to go for credible information on this is this Oxford Geoengineering program. And I've got this linked in your notes. This is the way they define it. Geoengineering is the deliberate, large-scale intervention in the Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change. And I put in different colors there, I think the key points here. It has to be intentional because look, climate change is actually a large-scale intervention in the Earth's natural systems, but it was unintentional, right? It has to be large-scale. So the scaling of this is, I think, what makes it geoengineering, like as in the whole globe. And the intention is to counteract climate change. Note here, it doesn't have to be necessarily high tech. A lot of things are in geoengineering, but afforestation, reforestation, just tree planting is often grouped in under geoengineering. Okay, we've seen this one before, right? This is an important thing to take away from this course, these sort of categories of policy responses to climate change, mitigation, addressing, and reducing our impacts on the system. Adaptation is making us more resilient in the face of the climate. And geoengineering would be this direct intervention into the climate system itself. I also had put these things up here in a previous talk, right? So we're focusing on geoengineering here. Let me go to the next slide because it outlines the kinds of engineering and geoengineering, sorry. And everywhere I've turned, they use this two-fold taxonomy. So this seems to be kind of universal term of art. There's one kind of geoengineering is usually called solar radiation management or solar geoengineering. And this is all different ways of reflecting a little bit of the sun's energy back into space to counteract the temperature rise caused by greenhouse gas emissions. This can be albedo enhancement. So albedo is the reflective property of white or light colored surfaces. So you can make the surface of the Earth lighter in reflecting solar radiation that way. You can put reflectors like mirrors in space to reflect a small portion of sunlight. And you can put different reflective particles, usually sulfate, some sort of aerosolized particles up in the stratosphere, so the upper atmosphere, in a way mimicking what volcanoes do to reflect sunlight. So that's one kind. The other bucket, the other second kind of geoengineering is greenhouse gas removal or carbon geoengineering. There are different names for this one, but we'll just go with this. This is from the Oxford group I showed you earlier. So the goal here is removing carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere directly. Lots of ways to do it. We mentioned afforestation. Trees suck out carbon dioxide, right? That's what they do. Biochar is really interesting. You can kind of Google this. It's a way of burning biomass to sequester carbon in a relatively stable form that sort of will sit there for a long time. There's bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration. This is talked about in IPCC reports. This is a way of using bioenergy and then capturing the CO2 that comes out of it and then sequestering it in the Earth's surface, like in a geological structure somehow, so it stays there, right? Because again, the whole thing is Can we get carbon out of the atmosphere and into the lithosphere where it could stay in the rocks? There's ambient air capture of CO2 or other greenhouse gases technology, just suck it right out of the atmosphere. There's been experiments on ocean fertilization, like iron fertilization. The idea is iron is the rate limiting nutrient for algal blooms. So you could put a bunch of iron out there, get more algae photosynthesize and absorb carbon dioxide, and then they rain to the bottom of the ocean where they could store that CO2 in the lithosphere. My understanding is that this hasn't worked out too well, but it's still, I think, a live project. Enhanced weathering would be a way of, some rocks like limestone, I think, check me on that one, when they weather, that process actually involves absorbing CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then it becomes sort of calcified or built into the rock structure and back into the lithosphere. So maybe we could just take this natural process and speed it up or increase the scale of it somehow. And then I have to move this thing. What did I put? Oh, ocean alkalinity enhancement. This actually would be a 2-for-1. We haven't talked about this, but one of the consequences of climate change is ocean acidification. So you can actually, there's different ways to increase the alkalinity of the ocean to counteract ocean acidification, but this would also give the ocean a greater capacity to absorb CO2. Okay, so those are just some examples of that second kind of geoengineering. Now, here is from the Oxford group, and I know this is a little fuzzy, but you can go to the website I linked to find this. I just want to put this one up here for talking about where are we with these things. Look, there is experimentation going on, and there have been trial runs out there. Ocean iron fertilization, there's a Stanford group that's doing these aerosols up in the stratosphere. So I won't go over this in detail, but it's kind of neat. It shows you where they think, the Oxford group thinks we are in terms of readiness for these. Like, could we deploy them now, or how far in the future are they? The cost of them, and you see those blue and white dots. So the more number of blue dots is how effective it would be in terms of cooling the Earth. So space mirrors, for example, are really, really effective, but you see they've got lots of black dots. I think that means they're a little bit further in the future coming, and lots of dollar signs, really expensive, right? So these are things to weigh in a calculation about what kind of geoengineering to do. It doesn't get to whether we should do any of this at all. That's coming up in a second. Okay, do we need geoengineering? Remember last time we talked about electrifying everything? And one of the bonuses of that, at least according to the folks who were proponents of this, is that you wouldn't have to do any carbon capture and sequestration or any kind of geoengineering at all. And there are different projections of different scenarios that we could run where you wouldn't have to use this to achieve our climate objectives. But I wanted to put up here from the IPCC report that you read the summary for policymakers. This is from chapter 2. The role of carbon dioxide removal, and that's that second category of geoengineering. And they usually talk about afforestation or this bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration that we talked a little bit about. Solar radiation management is mentioned only to say that they're not going to talk about it. Okay, I think that's the politics maybe, or the tech reality of a lot of that SRM is just not even close to being feasible right now. Here's what they say: all analyzed pathways limiting warming to 1.5 C with no or limited overshoot use CDR to some extent to neutralize emissions from sources. And it goes on. In other words, yes, we need this, according to the IPCC, if we're going to hit this 1.5 C target without overshooting. They all go on to say, doing this at scale is unproven, and relying on this is a major risk. Okay, so that's where the IPCC stands on this. Like, yes, if we want to hit this ambitious climate target, we're going to need it. And wow, we don't know what the risks are, but they're probably really high to do this. Okay, so should we do it? I'll wrap up on this, just a couple of slides. A lot to think through here, so let me just kind of populate your brain with some questions you might want to ask when you're thinking about the ethics of geoengineering. Is it a wise thing to do? Which kind is best, and how would you determine that? Remember that graphic with, well, there's costs, there's effectiveness of it. How would it be decided? What metrics would you use to define what does a successful project look like? Part of that would have to be this risk cost benefit calculation of these different strategies. And remember, anytime you're doing a consequentialist or utilitarian assessment of what we should do, there's all sorts of judgments you have to make about what kinds of costs and benefits to factor in, how you define them, who gets to count in that process, how long you project out the costs and benefits, how much you discount future impacts or future costs. Lots of things to consider there. And then the process. Who should be involved and how should it be decided? That's where a lot of the ethics in geoengineering debate is situated now. Okay, last thing, I put in your notes just a couple of articles that I think are, well, one article, this one, the Wire magazine, and this is a longer, like 80-page sort of statement by a consortium of groups. The article makes a case that we need to do geoengineering. And this one, as you could guess from the title, is The Big Bad Fix, the case against geoengineering. We should not do it. So briefly, kind of what is a case for geoengineering, or a case for geoengineering? It usually runs like this. Look, we're facing a climate crisis. We need something to buy ourselves more time. The clock is ticking. Current policies are nowhere near sufficient to achieve our climate objectives. We've seen that, right? Even if you have everybody on board with the Paris Climate Agreement, what we've committed to with our NDCs, not going to get us to 1.5 or even 2 degrees C. And this is a tech fix approach, which is good because it can garner a lot of support. And it could be, depending on which one we choose, relatively cheap and easy to deploy. So why wouldn't we do this? We need to look at the IPCC said we're probably going to need this. We're facing a ticking clock. We should put our resources into this. And also another part is it doesn't mean we can't also mitigate emissions, right? I mean, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do the tech fix geoengineering thing while we're solving the more root problems of getting on top of our emissions. So that's kind of what a proponent might say. Now, an opponent, somebody against geoengineering, would say the way it's structured, at least right now, is undemocratic. It's like this global elite who have all this capital who are then going to decide for the rest of the world that, oh yeah, we're just going to run this global experiment and dump a bunch of sulfates in the atmosphere. That can't be right. And the whole, even if you fix like the process by way it's decided, it's reductionistic, it's technocratic. Remember our talk about a wicked problem? It's like a wicked problem is not like a broken pipe where you can just take one end and get it stuck on the other end. But geoengineering makes it look like a wicked problem is that. And if we take that approach, we're inevitably going to overlook something important. We're going to screw something up. So we need to take a root cause approach, not an end of pipe approach. Not to mention that these technologies are extremely risky. Do you remember we read that Orestes and Conway piece about the kind of a future history of what would happen with geoengineering, and it screwed up the some sort of ocean circulation pattern, which then caused a drought over India or something. In other words, we don't know what's going to happen when we start monkeying with the climate in these ways. It's way too risky. This was interesting. In the big bad fix, or is that what it's called? The one I've linked in your notes that's against geoengineering. At the end of their little summary, they say hands off Mother Earth. And I think that's fascinating. You talk about what is a philosophy of climate change? Look, I've been making a case, it's all throughout. Here's one of the places. There is, I think, a metaphysic behind those who oppose geoengineering that says, look, humans are limited. We have a limited reach. We're not smart enough to know what Mother Earth has figured out. And if we start monkeying with it, it's going to bring bad things. We need to understand we're not gods. We can't engineer the planet. We need to learn how to live more simply within the boundaries that are appropriate to us and reduce our footprint and not like go tinkering with the dynamics of the earth. That's, I think, an underlying sort of metaphysical worldview. By contrast, and I'll end on this, this actually came out of this Stuart Brand foundational figure in environmental thinking in the US. This quote came out of the article for geoengineering. And that's a different metaphysic, right? That we're made in the image and likeness of God, say, to put it in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or however you want to put it. The eco-moderns talk about this too. We're basically gods. We're stewards of the planet. We're the ones with the high intelligence who are engineering things already anyways, right? There's no way of getting around it. We're already tinkering with all sorts of systems. Let's just get really good at it, right? So Akbar kind of liked that one, so I'll leave you with that as the quote of the day. Hopefully this kind of quick overview gives you some touch points where you can go learn more about geoengineering. Be really interested to talk with you more about it. Okay, but enough for now. And until next time, when we move on to our next module on the US presidential election, may the force be with you.